The Ark of the Covenant is the apex of interstellar engineering. It's a sophisticated containment and communication device built by cooperating civilizations, primarily the Taygetans and the Karistus. It's staffed with a holographic artificial intelligence that acts as the Ark's mind, its steward, and when necessary, its executor. At the center of the Ark is a crystalline containment core. This is not a crystal in the decorative sense. It is a frequency lattice engineered to hold and stabilize informational matter. Think of it as a three-dimensional data matrix capable of storing biological, energetic, and temporal information simultaneously. This core holds planetary genetic archives, not just DNA strands as chemicals, but DNA as frequency patterns. Every species, ecosystem, and major life branch on Earth exists there as a resonant template. This is why the Ark functions as a restart mechanism after a planetary catastrophe. The information is alive, not frozen. The biological and genetic data inside the Ark is stored in nanotube structures. However, those nanotubes are not the way, they're not used the way that humans imagine specimen containers. They're not jars or vials, they're information carriers, okay? What I described earlier as frequency lattices and crystalline matrices is the operating field, while nanotubes are the physical encoding medium embedded within that field. This is where there's some relation to the positive black goo, all right? Black goo is also a crystalline informational substrate that can hold planetary DNA frequency. The Ark does not contain loose black goo, but it operates on the same principle, encoded life through frequency crystallization. Okay, to the ancient people who had no context for such systems, the Ark behaved like magic. To the Ark, it was simply logic. It had sensors and actuators and a set of protocols that would escalate outcomes based on a target signature. That escalation was not capricious. It was pre-programmed. It was defense by degrees, calibrated to an array of measurements that reached far beyond simple identity cards or seals. The Ark reads frequency, DNA, and a person's intent. Those three pieces of information together formed a complete enough picture for it to decide whether a being could handle, approach it, or operate it, or even be allowed in the proximity of its contents. Okay? Frequency is not moral purity. Frequency is thought and energetic alignment. It's the vector of consciousness occupies in relation to other fields. DNA is literal, biochemical coding. Intent is behavioral, the plan your consciousness carries in the moment. Put them together, and the Ark could tell a Cabal clone from a Taygetan starseed. It could distinguish a benevolent visitor from a covert looter. That is why legends began saying only the worthy could touch it. Worthiness was rarely about obedience or ritual. It was about compatibility. The Ark was designed to integrate with cultures it trusted, okay? And to reject those that would corrupt or weaponize its contents. So no wonder when, the black projects tried to get close and open one of these, it defended itself. They didn't have the right biochemical signature, okay? They didn't have the right frequency. So its defenses were interesting and terrifying at the same time. Yazzie described magnetic and electric systems as primary, but that's the shorthand. Those are the physical effects, the manifestations that you could witness. The core mechanics were frequency-based. Magnetic fields and high voltage discharges were how the Ark translated algorithmic decisions into kinetic reality. The holographic AI inside coordinated pulses that could melt circuitry, scramble neural fields, and tear apart organized formations of matter if necessary. Think of it as an immune system for objects of planetary importance, with white blood cell level responses that could escalate into organ level destruction. When it pushed back, it did so like a perfectly rational computer defending the data and the matter entrusted to it. So there's also the question of who built it and why. Like I said, The Taygetans and the Karistus, they collaborated on it. The cherubim on the top are not symbolic metaphors for masculine and feminine energies. They are signatures, memorials to civilizational authorship. Both the Karistus and the Taygetan, they use winged humanoid imagery in their iconography, and they both helped engineer the Ark. The Karistus in particular remained involved in custodial roles long after the Ark left immediate oversight. The historical entanglement explains why one of the surviving Arks, the so-called Ark of Gabriel, is currently in Russian custody while being controlled by Karistus operatives. Another Ark remains under the Taygetan guardianship. At least 3 Arks exist, or one was destroyed, likely during the turbulence of the 20th century when competing powers discovered the scale of what had been hidden. The destruction in the 1940s was not a simple explosion. It was an act born of fear and greed, an attempt to resize, to seize, or to neutralize something that humans had no business owning or manipulating. Into this technological complexity came the human story. Religious institutions and imperial powers rewrote history. When Rome consolidated texts into canonical scriptures, myth-making and political control merged. The story of Moses and the tablets became a tidy explanation, an accessible myth for the people being taught obedience to distant rulers. The tablets, if they existed at all, were not the thing the Ark really protected. The Ark guarded a repository of planetary genetic information, a living archive encoded in matrices of matter and frequency that could, if needed, help repopulate species or stabilize ecosystems after a cataclysm. That is why the black goo conversation fits into this picture, even if indirectly. Now, please keep in mind that the natural black goo is actually positive in the lifeblood of a planet. It only turns negative when a planet is destroyed. Black goo, as Yazzie describes it, is an energetic crystalline structure that can embody planetary DNA. It's a substrate that carries the frequency fingerprint of entire biospheres. Harold Kautz-Vella and others have pointed to overlaps, and the idea that such goo could be part of or associated with the Ark is sensible. Yazzie is cautious, saying the black goo is related to planetary DNA, and that would be logical to imagine, links between such a substrate and a vault that stores genetic signatures. It does not mean the goo is literally in the Ark, but the two concepts operate in the same domain, the domain of preserving life through encoded frequency and matter. The Ark is also a communications node. Its size matches the interior of the Great Sarcophagus, because that sarcophagus was not a coffin. It was a resonant cradle. Placing the Ark in the pyramid was an engineering decision designed to create a standing wave, an etheric amplifier that allowed the Ark to reach across distances in ways that simple radio or light cannot accomplish. That resonant placement turned the pyramid into a transmitter and a receiver, a beacon that could handshake with starcraft, orbiters, or distant stations. The Ark bridged the physical and the energetic, the seen and the unseen. That is why those who assembled biblical histories misinterpreted its placement as sacred burial. They had to cloak the technology with the language available to them so they could preserve the knowledge while hiding the mechanics. Custody has always been political. The reason the Karistus do not openly possess an Ark in visible museums is because the perception and the possession are different. The Ark of Gabriel resides in a physical region under a state flag, but not under the state leadership. Karistus operatives covertly around the object because their agendas and responsibilities are not limited to earthly politics. Taygeta holds another Ark out of reach, for the same reason. The Arks were never intended to be trophies. They were tools to be managed by civilizations that could understand the responsibility inherent in controlling the seed patterns of life. That leads to the pragmatic problem of defense. Is there a method to defend against the Ark's power? Yazzie states that frequency weapons are among the hardest to counter. Conventional armor and fortifications mean little. when your neural coherence is being scrambled or your molecular cohesion is being challenged by precise electromagnetic fields. Blocking an arc requires matching or misaligning frequency signatures on a level most human tech is not designed for. Theoretically, if a crafter device could reproduce the arc's handshake parameters, if it could emulate Taygetan or Karistus frequency signatures and DNA patterns in a trustworthy way, the arc might accept access. That's not the same as a password that can be stolen. It's a living compatibility matrix constantly updated, tied to origin civilizations. That is why the arc will not harm friendly races even if they're not Taygetan or Karistus, provided their frequency is non-regressive and their DNA signature aligns enough with authorized parameters. It will often simply block them, refuse proximity, or create a safety bubble unless the intruder escalates, in which case the arc escalates too. The social repercussions of this are enormous. When an artifact can detect and reject regressive intent, misemerge that moralize the technology in spiritual tests. That is how the story of worthiness became morality theater. Kings and priests hardened that theater into law and scripture because it allowed control over who could claim divine favor. Legends of deadly sparks and immaterial wrath are really cautionary tales about technology misinterpreted and repurposed by those who read it without the right manual. Humanity has tried to weaponize arc-like systems. There were attempts in the 20th century to reverse engineer anything resembling arc mechanics. Some programs looked at energetic resonance, others studied enzymatic crystalline matrices similar to black goo. Those efforts were partial and dangerous. Without the cultural context, without the custodial protocols of Taygetans and Karistus, intervention often proved catastrophic or unstable. That is part of why one of the arcs was ultimately destroyed. Fear led to a scorched earth approach to avoiding responsibility by removing the object altogether. Destruction rarely destroys the knowledge, it scatters it. And that scattering is what gave rise to a second generation of secretive recovery missions, black projects, and mythic reconstruction. Another important detail is inaccessibility. Yazi made it clear that either way, a Taygetan or a Taygetan descendant could physically move the arc. That includes Taygetan starseeds living incarnated on Earth. The arc reads DNA and frequency, not passport stamps in place of birth. If you carry Taygetan seed in your genome and your frequency resonates, the arc will acknowledge you. That is why stories of prophets or chosen people being able to move or touch the arc have a basis in bioenergetic reality. It is not limited to full-blooded civilizations alone. It cares about resonance more than labels. There are also cultural artifacts tied to arc technology that modern scholars mistake as ritual. The cherubim are a perfect example. They are not purely symbolic ornaments. They are cultural pointers and technical signposts. They announce lineage, authorship, and protocol. When storytellers later called them angels, the word stuck. But angels in the scriptures are palimpsest, a layering of eyewitness awe and later editorial meaning. Palimpsest means a manuscript or piece of writing material on which the original writing has been effaced to make room for later writing, but of which traces remain. Karistus and Taygetan shared the winged motif, and both left their mark on the design. That shared authorship explains why the arc's top motif is ambiguous and why multiple civilizations claim association. Finally, the arc raises ethical questions that are still unresolved. Who has the right to steward planetary genetic information? Who decides what counts as regressive? Can a device be so sovereign that it supersedes human law? Those are not merely philosophical questions. They are governance problems that interstellar cultures had to solve long ago and that humanity is still stumbling through. The Ark was built to be sovereign in order to prevent misuse. Its autonomy was a safeguard, not a rejection of governance. It was a decision by its creators, that certain things must be protected by immovable criteria, and those criteria were energetic, biological, and intentional. There's more to the story. The Grail, which Yazzie briefly mentioned, is part of the same family of artifacts and functions, a different kind of repository with overlapping purposes. There are other devices and caches across the planet, some hidden in plain sight, others entombed in resonant chambers, each with their own custodial network of star races and local allies. The Ark is only the most famous, the most mythologicalized, because it touched the narrative centers of human religions and because its effects were dramatic enough to make it into cautionary myth. So, the Ark remains in places under controlled custody, sometimes in the hands of those who created it, sometimes guarded by intermediaries who learn the protocols. It is not worshipped by its makers, it's managed. It's treated like a library, a sacred seed bank, and when necessary, a weapon to be used defensively. It protects because the consequences of misuse are planetary. And this is the reason for its ferocity and secrecy. So, that sums it up. I hope you guys enjoyed this message. Let me know what you think about the Ark. This is the Taygetan perspective. I'll see you in the next video.